Hello and welcome back. This is the exciting finale of my solo Brutal V Rising run. After dozens of boss fights and hours of collecting loot, we are finally fighting Dracula. By the way, I'm Savalian. I make videos about games, development, and creativity. We are playing V Rising with mostly default brutal settings with some slight adjustments. I talked about these in, I think, video 3, but the important things to know for this fight specifically is that the V-Blood multiplier is set to plus 25, and the V-Blood gear level is set to plus 1. Between the last video when we fought Adam and this video, several real-life weeks passed because I got super busy at work. And the way I'm going to break down this video, I'm going to talk through each phase one at a time and kind of talk about how I got through that phase, how I got familiar with it, what the moves are, and then at the end we will see my full successful attempt. Also, a footnote here, some people split the last phase into phases 3 and 4. I didn't really think about it that way, so I'm kind of lumping the last two sections into one phase, but there are kind of like 4 parts to this fight. And I'll just mention now, the brutal fight is very different from normal mode, and it's also very different solo than it is on multiplayer. I might mention a few of the differences that I can remember from multiplayer, but this video is obviously focused on what happens during a solo attempt. But here we go. My very first attempt at the drag fight was just kind of an icebreaker. I hadn't played much V Rising at all in weeks, and I just wanted to get that first attempt over with, see how the fight felt, try to remember how to play, so I don't even think I popped potions or anything. To face Dracula, we go all the way into Mortium, to his castle, run up the stairs past the gargoyles. If you stay far enough away from them, they won't even wake up. And then you'll get to a magic wall, magic door. This is what you need the blood key for. And inside, you'll find the ruined castle, the throne room, and a portal to the Shadow Realm. And something cool they did for the Dracula fight, I assume to make it less grindy, is that your blood will reset to whatever it was at the beginning before you go into the portal. So you'll want to top up before going into the Shadow Realm. It will not reset your potions, but as usual your potions will persist through death. So your blood will refill. You'll probably only need like 1 or 2 bloods if you take a very long time on this fight. But you will need a potion every hour or so, you know, however long it is. I'm using a 2 shield strategy, at least for this first phase. I'll talk about the different move swaps I do for later phases. This is the only fight I've ever done that with. The only one you really need to, I think. But for phase 1, I'm using double shields. I tried different shields throughout my attempts and ultimately found that the ice shield and the chaos shield were the most useful for me. When you enter the Shadow Realm, you see a much nicer version of the castle and a big ornate arena where our fight will happen. Dracula will greet you. He has a couple of different voice lines that he can do, I think because it's common to do a lot of attempts and they didn't want you to just have to hear the same exact thing every time. Also, I love this voice. I could listen to this voice forever. In fact, I basically did because it took me such a long time to get him down. I stopped counting after about 40 attempts, and my rough estimate based on the time it took me is a little over 100. That might be kind of high because once I was getting further in the fight, it did take longer per attempt, but that's kind of my estimate right now. And if this seems like a lot to you, well, maybe it is. Maybe you're better at games than me. I never pretended to be an expert. Dracula has several moves he can use in phase 1, and he uses them right after the other, kind of rapid fire. It takes a little while to learn the rhythm of all these moves and get familiar enough to dodge them correctly or veil or whatever you have to do, but by the end of this I think I got pretty good at it. He does these moves in a random order as far as I can tell. There's some things that I believe are spaced out in a certain way, but a lot of these little moves are randomly selected, I believe, so you have to be on your toes. Between moves he will either teleport, walk towards you, or turn into a wolf. In multiplayer, he will also spawn wolf ads that can be very annoying, but in single player he does not do any ads in this phase, except the bats, which we'll talk about. And when he's coming out of wolf form, specifically, he will do a big sideways slash attack, so be on the lookout for that when he gets near you. The first phase 1 move I actually saw was what I'm calling the stab. This is a simple stab forward with his sword, and it has a much bigger range outward than you would expect. So for this one, to dodge this one, you do have to move to the side. And I feel like moving to his right or to the left, if you're looking at him, works better. I don't know if that's actually true, but that seemed to work better for me. He telegraphs this move with a sort of stance that he does, so once you're able to recognize that, you should be able to dodge this pretty easily without veiling. But there's nothing wrong with using shields or veil in a pinch. There are just other moves that I think you'll want to save those for that I'll talk about next. But the next move is the big star. By the way, I obviously don't know the official names of any of these moves. I'm just describing them and making up my own names. You'll see the big star telegraphed on the ground, and you'll want to either stand behind him or between the points of the star, because they're going to shoot out in a straight line, and they're pretty fast, so you really need to get out of the way before they fire to dodge them.
There is no escape.
This move gets even more important to dodge in later phases because it gets a significant buff in phase 2, but it still hurts pretty bad in phase 1. You can also catch this with your shield if you want to. Next, the most dangerous move in my opinion of phase 1 is the axe throw. I have noticed that he will teleport near one of the pillars in the room when he does this, and he always says something as an audio cue like run or there's no escape. Something like that is his voice line for this move. And he will throw these big spinning axes in a pretty huge arc. And it's similar to the one that we get with our axe, the second move that we get with the axe. They will also boomerang back to him, and they curve quite a bit, and they do a huge amount of damage if they hit you. You can dodge these. There is a predictability to them, but you just have to learn it after a while. You can also catch them with the shield, which I recommend, especially in multiplayer, because it also stops it from hitting other people. In multiplayer, if you can shield it, you can also use the pillar to stop one or both of the axes. Moving sort of around the pillar is one strategy I've seen people use a lot. In the next move, Dracula will do a series of dashes followed by a big forward slashing move. This one I typically would use my veil on because you can kind of see him gearing up to do the big slash, but be careful because there is two specific moments in this fight that you will want to try to save your veil for. Don't worry, we'll get there. The next move, he will slash twice, and when he does, it sends out this big red projectile in a straight line. His sword does a little flourish and turns red before he does this. That's the only sort of telegraph that move has. It's fairly quick, but you know, once you start to pick up on all these different moves, you'll start to just sort of instinctively understand them, I think. That's what happened for me. I like to catch these with my shields as well, and it's another move that is, you know, somewhat dangerous now, but it gets much more dangerous in phase 2. Another move, he's very busy in phase 1. He will just stop and throw something, and these are little red balls that turn into bats. And the bats are important to understand because we'll see them throughout the fight and throughout multiple phases. They will face you and display a sort of a laser as a telegraph. The laser doesn't hurt you, it just shows you where they're going to be. And then they will fly along that path pretty quickly and do damage to whatever they hit. And these are kind of homing. They will line up with the direction you're moving, so you can avoid them somewhat easily by simply changing direction once the lines show up. You can also attack the bats, and they drop these little blood orbs. I'm not really sure what these are good for. You can pick them up, but they don't heal you. Someone mentioned to me that they increase the healable health that you can do, like the black bar on your health bar, but when I tried picking them up, I didn't see anything change at all, so I did not bother with these. Maybe someone can put in the comments what they're actually for. After a few rounds of these little phase 1 attacks, he switches things up, and I don't know what to call this exactly. The blood vortex feels fitting, but Dracula will stop somewhere and hover, creating a very large red circle that will slowly shrink. And while this is happening, he's going to spit out these little red orbs in this triangular pattern that will slowly spin around as it flies outward. So it's like this vortex of little projectiles, the circle closing in. You want to stay away from the edge of the circle, and when you can, veil through it. I've seen people walk through it without using the veil, but personally I have not been able to get the timing right on that. I think there's a brief moment after it like solidifies but before it explodes where you can walk through it without getting grabbed. But if you do get caught by the border of the circle, it will sort of grab you up, pull you into the middle, and then you'll get some health and blood drained away, and it will just like chuck you across the room. So you want to avoid that. I recommend saving your veil, use it to get through the circle, and then you can also get out of the circle early if you want, but I think it's a good idea to just get in there and wail on him while he's doing this, because it's a time where he's not directly attacking you and you could do a lot of damage. If you are playing multiplayer, the blood vortex is also a good time to res people if they happen to die outside where the circle spawns. As long as you can position yourself like behind a pillar or have someone run interference so that the orbs flying out don't interrupt the res, you have enough time during this to get someone up who has fallen. And if you're playing solo, you can use that time to just do a quick blood mend or drink a health potion or something. Dracula does another like special move during phase 1, and this is the bats phase. Typically he'll do a lot of the normal moves, the normal sword moves. He'll do the blood vortex, he'll do some more normal moves, he'll do the bats. But when this happens, it will get dark, and he will start spawning in a lot of those bats that we talked about. So you have to move, try and avoid them. Do not veil during this phase. It's tempting, especially if there's a lot of bats like circling around you, it's tempting to use your veil early, but you really want to save your veil for the end of this phase, because when it's done, he's going to spawn in solo, it's just him. In multiplayer, he spawns in these like shadow Draculas, and they will grab you, lift you up, bleach your health, blood, and also heal Dracula. So you really want to avoid this, getting caught by this. So just to recap, bats spawn, avoid the bats, wait until you see a circle spawn in on the ground, and then veil out of it immediately or you'll get grabbed. And in multiplayer, depending on how many people are there, there may not be enough like adds to get everybody, so you may get lucky, you may not always get hit by that move, but usually I think it scales up to 4, so there's probably at least 4 of them if you're playing multiplayer. Also in multiplayer, the shadow Draculas will remain alive for a little while. They don't live forever until you kill them, but they can hurt you if they're there even after that initial grab. So if it's multiplayer, you'll either want to kill them or stay away from them until they despawn. So that's actually, I think, everything that happens in phase 1. It's a lot. This is like a whole fight on its own. We got 2 more phases to go. But some tips for phase 1. One is use the pillars to your advantage. You can use the pillars to block a lot of his moves. The big star move, the little red slashes, the axe throw, as I mentioned, can destroy the axes if they hit the pillar. The little orbs during the blood vortex, all of those will be killed by the pillar. The pillars are not destructible by his moves, but they are only available in phase 1, so use them. I also really like the Chaos Veil for added mobility, but later in my attempts I do switch around to different veils, because I think once you're familiar with the rhythm of the fights and you're able to dodge a lot more of the moves without using the veil, you can then figure out which of the bonuses from the other veils is more useful than having that extra recast. And as I mentioned, I would recommend just getting in during the blood vortex and wailing on him with your melee attacks. Rotate around him slowly so that the orbs don't hit you, but he's basically defenseless, and you have a good few seconds to just get a bunch of weapon hits on him before you have to veil out of the circle. This is especially useful for things like the legendary axes, which I do get, that have the leech on them. Speaking of the legendary axes, after probably at least 12 attempts on Dracula, I noticed that tier 2 rifts were starting soon. and I went to get some shards planning to just buy another epic, but I ended up getting the legendary axes as a drop from one of the rift bosses, which is such a stroke of luck. I didn't get any legendaries during my multiplayer run after this. I had to actually borrow them from other people who got some legendaries. But the cool thing about them is that the legendary weapons have upgrades to the weapon moves. So I don't know all of them, you can just look them up, but the red twins, the legendary axes, increase the duration of the speed boost on the first move, and then on the second move they give you 2 bonus axes in the axe throw, and then they also add just a bunch of leech to the weapon and to weapon skills, and they give you a bit more health, which is nice. So now I do have a very melee and weapon skill focused build, heavy on leech, which is not really what I prepared my armor for. I think I've got the spell power armor, so it's not totally synergizing here, but I did not take the time to remake my armor. I just kept going.
Thank you for returning it to me. Run, little rebellion. You will learn to obey. My veins flows the essence of true goodness. No mercy for the weak. Grovel before the king. On your knees. There is no escape from your fate. Within the mist unseen. Run, little rebel.
On my first attempt with the new axes, I can immediately see the benefit of the weapon leech. I adapted by remembering to use my weapon skills more often, using that first one to get a little bit of movement as well. And all of this helped tremendously because the first attempt with my new axes was actually the first attempt where I got to phase 2. So here we go, phase 2 time.
I am the ghost of your fears.
To signal the start of phase 2, Dracula will fly up to the middle of the arena for several seconds. This is another good time to do reses, to heal up if you're in single player. And this happens near 50%, but not at 50%, which has always seemed weird to me. He will then explode some new wings for himself and destroy the pillars in the room, so we don't have the pillars anymore. But that's okay, because he also doesn't do the axe throw anymore in phase 2. He has some other moves. He will continue to do some of the moves from phase 1, but a lot of them will be changed in some way to make them more dangerous. And there's a bunch of new moves that he will do for phase 2, largely based on his ability to fly with these new wings. Right when you get into this new phase, you'll notice a little red orb floating slowly around the arena that will transform into a big blood crystal with a ring around it. You want to prioritize destroying these as quickly as possible. Basically, unless Dracula is almost dead, you want to get these blood crystals down first. The rings around them do a significant amount of damage if you touch them, so you'll want to veil through them if it spawns and you're outside of it. But the reason you want to kill these is because he will spawn more throughout the fight, and if you don't get these down, they will start to fill the arena with these huge overlapping rings, and you won't have the room to move around for some of these very movement heavy mechanics. So let's start talking through the phase 2 attacks. One of his more simple moves, he will do a dash, and then he will do this very big rectangular AoE on the ground in front of him. This is pretty clearly telegraphed, and you should have time to move out of it without using your veil, so not a huge deal to avoid that one. There's also one move that I'll mention, but he really did not do it very often for me. I only saw it a few times, where he would fly up into the air and then after a moment slam back down on top of you with a big slash move. So you have to pay attention if he flies up into the air and be ready to veil out of it when he comes back down. But I don't know why he basically never did this in any of my attempts. He did all the other moves fairly frequently, but this one I think I saw a total of twice in hours and hours of playing, so I don't know what was going on there. It also seemed much more common in multiplayer, so maybe there was something going on with like skeleton minions or something, where he only does this if there's multiple enemies. Either way, it can really hit hard, and all you have to do is just watch for when he does that big leap, and then know that he's gonna fly over to you and smash back down. One of his favorite moves in phase 2 is this line of orbs. He'll spawn in this line of orbs and then they'll fly forward. They kind of wiggle a bit. So they don't go in like a perfect straight line like the books in the librarian fight. They kind of move around. There's usually a gap in the line right in front of him, and then if you're farther away, you can see where they're gonna space out a little bit and stand between. And then of course you can always shield through these. Another very dangerous move, remember the red slashes from phase 1? He does those, but this time he does 4 in a row, and they have a really nasty curve to them. I don't know how much of this is like homing or if they just curve the same way all the time, but I do know that they curve the same direction every time in a pattern. So if you could memorize the pattern, you could literally just step to the side the right way 4 times in a row and dodge all of them. I struggle to remember it, and it's a little bit hard to see it on the video because I don't always have them in view, but I think they go left, left, right, left. I could be wrong, but moving in the opposite of that pattern of where the projectiles curve, you can dodge them. You can also soak these up with your shield, which I tried to do whenever I saw them because I want to get those good shield charges. I want to charge up the chaos bolt thing, and I want to use that ice damage. So I tried to catch these with the shield whenever I saw them, but if you don't have a shield ready, learning how to step out of the way is a good backup plan. The next part of phase 2 is my least favorite part. This one nearly sent me into a rage. It was the reason that I failed almost every attempt that I failed in phase 2. Dracula will go to the center and he will start spawning in a bazillion little red orbs that will home in on your position. There are too many to shield through all of them, even with the double shield strategy, and at the same time the arena will be split into quadrants with a laser that slowly turns, kind of like Belmont's move, but slower and a little bit narrower. And after dying and dying and dying, both in this run and in the multiplayer run I did after, the strategy that I devised is to move constantly from one side of the quadrant to the other, as far away as you can get. And I found that it worked better if I went the direction the laser was going, and then as I'm doing that constant side-to-side movement, if I notice I'm on a collision course with some orbs, adding in like a surprise forward or backward movement seemed to trip up the like AI and let me get around them. And when I get to the edge of the quadrant and need to turn around, if I see that there are a lot of orbs coming towards me, I'll use a shield during that like transition to go back the other way. But also be aware, the lasers will go away, but the orbs will keep spawning for a little bit. So you think you're done because the lasers go away, but there's actually like several more seconds of dodging that you will need to do. That move is so tough. I really hated it. It felt like even when I was doing well, I would still get hit by several of these stupid orbs. So I got real mad about these. Another phase 2 move is that he will do the big red star, but when the projectiles fly out, they will leave these large AoE circles on the ground that explode. You do not want to stand in these, so you want to dodge the projectile itself And then you also need to get away from the place that it lands before it explodes. He will also do the bat phase during phase 2, and I believe this works exactly the same as phase 1. I don't think anything crazy happens here, but you will want to save your veil for the end to dodge that grab that he does right at the end of the bat phase. So keep an eye out for that. And there are swords. I almost forgot about the swords because I think they start happening later in phase 2. They didn't seem to happen early in phase 2 for me, so I think I was just dying too early to see them a lot of the time. But while you're dodging all these other moves, he will sometimes spawn swords that show up floating in the air and then fall down after a moment. They have a circle for a telegraph, and you basically just need to keep moving, keep an eye on the circles, try to change direction a lot. This is another move that tries to predict where you're going to be. So change direction, try not to walk into a different sword when you're doing that. These don't last too long, but while this is happening, of course, Dracula is still doing all his other moves. The crystals are circling, there's a lot going on, and this is just like another thing that you will need to pay attention to. And I'll mention here that progress in this fight was really not linear for me. Until I got much more practice with phase 1, for a long time it was hard to even get to phase 2. So like I got to phase 2 once, and then I died in phase 1 several times before I was able to get back. But as you practice, you slowly start getting stronger at the earlier phases, and then you can really focus on learning the sort of next phase that you're in. I think my experience in this fight must be how people feel when they play Souls games, because even though I got a little ragey during that orb storm thing in phase 2, overall I was really enjoying the repeated attempts. I could never really get into the groove of Souls games. I talk a lot about that in my video about Another Crab's Treasure, which I loved, but for me, Souls games always felt like way too hard. They lacked any promise of like a reward or incentive for learning the fight. So this fight felt hard but possible. And then even though I was dying a lot, the incentive was tied into the rest of the game, into the progression, into unlocking these last few recipes, buttoning up the story, so to speak. So I don't know. I feel like maybe I got a little taste of how people enjoy Souls games by playing this game. But after hours and hours and multiple days of real life time, I finally got to phase 3 for the first time. And I think I mentioned I did research the fight before doing these attempts. I did not go in blind, so I knew it was coming up, and the first thing I do when phase 3 starts is swap in some new spells. The specific spells to use are a personal preference. The goal here, the important thing in phase 3 part 1, is to do a lot of damage, with AoE damage being more useful in most cases, because we're going to be fighting a lot of adds. But Dracula will take a moment to collect himself and then go into the center of the room and seal himself up in a sort of blood cocoon. You cannot hurt Dracula during this part of phase 3, so don't waste any cooldowns. Shortly after going into this cocoon, he will start to heal and summon adds. Each of these adds has a tether that leads to Dracula, and they will slowly walk towards him. I think it's obvious, even if you didn't look up the fight, we do not want these adds to reach Dracula. Kill them quickly, push them back, freeze them, whatever you have available in the build that you're running. I really like chaos spells for this because the explosions when they die helps get groups of them down very quickly. You can use bites on these adds. You might want to save it for the ones that reach the center, so you can kill them really quickly. And any adds that do reach the center will transform into demons and give Drac a little bonus heal, so we do not want them to reach the center. It's not the end of the world if a couple of them get through, but it just makes the next part of phase 3 much more difficult. After the ads are done spawning, Dracula's heart will spawn in. We want to kill this heart, get it down, and we want to drink the blood when the prompt comes up. If it reaches Dracula, this will heal him, I think, more rapidly than the ads will, so work fast. The heart blood does give you a new blood type when you drink it. This is temporary, it will reset to whatever you had before the fight if you die. And this blood gives you huge bonuses in a lot of different areas. But the most important ones for the strategy that I'm using is that it has a 50% chance to reset your spell cooldowns, and it gives you a shorter veil cooldown. And after we do this, we enter the second half of phase 3, or phase 4 if you're dividing these up more reasonably than I did. And with the next part of the fight, we're making another spell change. I have no earthly idea how you use any other strategy for this last fight. This is the only thing that I could see working for me. And this is also the strategy I saw most often when I was looking up this fight. But while drinking the heart blood, because it transitions pretty quick after that, you want to open up your spells, swap in 2 counters. It's important that they aren't shields because we need to be able to block things from behind us as well. That's very important for this phase. And shields, you do have to aim for them to work. It may also help to put the Chaos Veil on if you swap that out, because the extra leap can really help in this one. But the next part of the fight is an absolute hellstorm of AoE damage, so I use the blood counter and the ice counter for the leech and the shield that they offer. And after you finish drinking the heart blood, Dracula will spawn in a big red ring around the outside of the arena. I think I've seen people call this the Blood Storm, which makes sense to me. That's a very fitting name. And he will also start doing these shockwaves that will push you out towards the Bloodstorm. The ring, the Bloodstorm ring, is basically the hard and rage timer. It will get smaller and smaller as the fight goes on, and until you literally have no space left in the center to do the fighting in. You will also start accumulating stacks of a debuff that makes you take more damage. And I think it's more damage from all sources. So the longer you are in this phase, the more damage you'll take, the less room you'll have, and at some point you will not have any arena left to use. So there is a time limit on this section of the fight, and this is why you really, really want to stop him from getting any extra healing in the first part of phase 3. This phase has a very distinct rhythm to it, and I think the key to success here is cycling through your counters and your veil in time with the rhythm of the fight. So as the shockwave is happening, and if you get pushed back, you'll need to veil back into the center. You do not want to be near the edge of the ring. But as the shockwave is happening, he will spawn lines of those red orbs that cross the screen in a very predictable pattern. I don't know, it's every couple of seconds, I think. You'll want to use a counter for each wave of those orbs. So counter 1, counter 2, then your veil. Keep an eye on when the cooldowns are reset. There's a little text that pops up, and if you can keep track of that in your head, I know there's a lot going on, but you can double up on counters, make use of those reset cooldowns as well as you can. In addition to the lines of orbs and the shockwave, he will also drop swords on you. So this is why the directionality of the shields doesn't really work on this one, because we need to be able to use our counters while we're dodging these swords, while we're moving around Dracula in different ways. So You want to stay out of the sword circles as well as you can. God, there's so much going on. And as you're dodging the waves of orbs and the swords and trying to stay in the middle with the shockwave, you want to just be hammering Dracula with as much weapon attack as you possibly can. If you can get some weapon skill attacks in there too, it will help. But it took me several attempts before I had like the brain power to even start thinking about that. So I was just doing a lot of basic attacks at the beginning of all this. But that's all he does in this last phase. It's just so much, and it takes so much effort to get to this point that it's really hard to actually learn this part of the fight. Because you have to get through all of phase 1 and all of phase 2 and then the ads phase before you can even try it. And then I'll warn you now, you probably will forget, I know I did, but you want to change your skills back to your phase 1 skills before you start the next attempt. So take a second, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Since I was doing this solo with no gear durability, it wasn't that bad to just wipe it and start again. But if you're going with a group, it's a good idea to call out for people to reset their skills before starting, so you don't have some people with like only counters on their bars that they maybe can't use for phase 1. And as I was doing all these attempts on phase 3, I remember thinking that it felt a little bit impossible. I was feeling a little disheartened because it was just so much happening. And even watching the video back, it's hard to tell exactly like what I was doing wrong, for example, because it's so chaotic. But I think it was a combination of just getting hit by a couple too many swords or missing the timing on some of these counter moves when the waves cross through the middle. I think, you know, they just do so much damage if you get hit by the swords, and it gets even worse as you build up those stacks. In the end, by my count, I ended up getting to phase 3 12 times before I finally made my successful attempt, which we will see right now.
You wield a fraction of my power, don't you? The scent of power, unmistakably mine. Thank you for returning it to me. No mercy for the weak. On your knees. Dracula, King. Gaze into the maw. Vortex. There is no escape from fate. Darkness comes to claim you. Kneel and die. Fleeing will not save you. You will learn to obey. You think you can beat me? I am inevitable.
On my successful attempt, I did switch to the Chaos Soul Shard from Talzur. I'm not sure how much this helped me, but I did. Overall, I just did a bit better. At this point in my attempts, I've done phase 1 so many times, I'm frequently able to get through phase 1 at full health, and this got even better during our multiplayer run where I got even more practice, where, you know, phase 1 really is just like a dance, and once you learn the steps to the dance, it's much easier to get through it without taking damage. Phase 2 still is pretty rough for me. But I think during this I managed to get through it without being totally dead. And then you do, I don't think I mentioned this, but you do get a significant heal when you drink the heart blood. So that's good as well because it helps you out with this last phase.
Impossible. How can my own powers betray me? Flee from your inevitable demise. Witness the might of the true Immortal King.
But in this last phase, on my successful attempt, I do think I was able to get a lot more weapon skill hits on Dracula, which may have made all the difference. I think the axe bonus with the leech might have helped me heal enough to stay alive through some of these waves, used in collaboration with the counters, with the shield from the ice counter, with the veil. I also think I was just dodging the swords better. This could have been complete luck. It could have been because I was learning to pay attention to all these things better. I might have just been possessed by the spirit of V Rising. But for whatever reason, this attempt just went really well. And then I finally got him. There he is. The culmination of hours of attempts after, you know, even more hours of getting through the whole rest of the game, all the bosses, building up my gear, and we did it. The end sequence is very cool. They really amped up the drama on this final boss fight. There's a little congratulatory message as you leave the Shadow Realm. And then, of course, you can craft the final piece of Dracula gear if you would like to. You can make the big gaudy Dracula throne. I never have. I think it's ugly as sin, but it is a symbol of all your hard work, so by all means do whatever makes you happy. But that is actually the end of my solo Brutal V Rising run. I'm so glad I was able to button this up with a win. There was a few moments in the middle there where I was really not sure if I would be able to do it, even on the slightly lowered settings. This last fight is no joke, but it's a lot of fun. And if you make your own attempt at Brutal Dracula, I wish you the best of luck. I remain supremely addicted to this game. Just 2 weeks after defeating Dracula by myself, I started a multiplayer Brutal run with some friends, and we also got Dracula down in there on default. That was actually on default with the plus 70 V blood multiplier and everything. But we managed to get Dracula down after a couple days of attempts. I think it was a total of maybe 6 to 8 hours of attempts with a lot of people, with frequently like 6 to 8 people were in that run. I'm also thinking of doing maybe a speed run, like certainly not anything competitive speed run, but I just want to see how fast I can do solo normal mode. That's kind of been on my mind lately. So if you'd like to see something like that, I will probably do that one on my Twitch, so I would recommend following me there. But here on this channel, now that this series is complete, I think I'm going to get back into some game dev content and check in on the fishing game that I've been working on for almost exactly a year at this point. So if you like this, if you want to see more game videos, if you want to see a little bit of development videos, give this video a like, subscribe, And keep your peepers peeled because I'll be back soon with another video, and I hope to see you there. Goodbye.